Morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming back to our strategical Convergence China, Brazil, the areas of trade, technology, infrastructure, and service, impacts on Brazil and the region. And welcome back to our third panel, trade, services, and technology, drivers of economic transformation. And today we'll invite five speakers will give us an impressive speech. And dear audience, your questions are also welcome. And during the speech, if you have any question, you can type in the chat box. And when the speakers say, they will answer you. And now we get started. Okay, let's first invite our first speaker, Professor Lucas Pineto da Silva, and his speech is titled Sino-Brazilian Bilateral Trade and Economic Complexity Approach. And Professor Lucas Pineto da Silva is now a PhD candidate in the international relations between the University of Sao Paulo and the King's College London, Political Economy of Chips. And he holds an MC in Strategic Studies and a BA in International Relations from Fluminense Federal University, Brazil. Previous positions include International Desk and Santander Corporate and International Banking, Professional Professor and INFER, and the lead researcher at the Brazilian Levi War College's Prospect Project. Let's warmly welcome. Dear Professor Lucas, yeah, okay, you can begin now.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Please let me know if you can see my presentation and hear me well.
Yes, we can.
All right. So my presentation today is a proposal I've been working on, is a work in progress, about how to measure bilateral trade relationships. And I applied this to Brazilian exports to China. So, well, as an introduction, it is worth mentioning that the literature presents many concerns about the primarization of Brazil's export basket. And China is a good example of that, because the relationship Brazil has with China in terms of exports is very contrasts a lot with the imports from China to Brazil. So Brazil's export basket has progressively shifted towards primary commodities since the early 2000s. And many authors in the literature associate this trajectory with premature deindustrialization, which means that Brazil, before becoming rich, it started to deindustrialize. Deindustrialization is something normal in the stages of the development of nations, but even China is in some way deindustrializing, considering deindustrialization as the diminishing of value added in total GDP, but that is expected to happen after the country reaches a certain amount of GDP per capita, which has not been the case of Brazil. Brazil may be the worst case or the fastest case of premature deindustrialization. Yet, no single quantitative measure captures the per partner quality of Brazil exports. So, as we can see here, Brazil exports to China represented 1.8% in 1997 until the year 2000, and now represents almost a third of everything Brazil exports. And it's the volume is asymmetric, and it the exports of Brazil to China is very concentrated in three products: soybeans, iron ore, and petroleum. So these three primary products dominate the bilateral basket. The volume tells one story, but quality, complexity, and structural transformation tell another. This means that even though Brazil has a very large surplus in trade with China, the quality of the products Brazil exports to China has been subject to a lot of questioning. So what is economic complexity? Is a measurement that came up in the literature in 2009 based on another article from 2007, basically developed by two economists, actually by a physicist and an economist. Hidalgo is the physicist, and Ricardo Hausmann is the economist. And economic complexity measures the amount of productive knowledge embedded in an economy's export basket. Inferred from the products it exports competitively and the global ubiquity of those products. We may not have enough time to explain in detail, but the economic complexity index is built based on the reviewed comparative advantages of countries. And then a matrix is built. And basically, the index represents if a country, how much of rare products, very complex products, a country exports. The more complex, the more rare products a country exports, the more complex is its economy. The less complex, the less rare, the more ubiquitous a product a country exports, the less complex it tends to be. So for instance, if you export soybeans, a lot of countries export soybeans. So if you export soybeans, you don't tend to be very complex. Now, if you export pharmaceuticals, and it's not something every country produces, not every country exports, you tend to be more complex. So ECI, which is the index built upon this concept of economic complexity, is a unidimensional ordering of countries by similarity of their export baskets. So this is a very famous diagram, and this one represents, this is from 2022, and this was elaborated by the Observatory of Economic Complexity at MIT, and it shows the exports, summarizes the exports from Brazil to China, and we can see how concentrated it is, and the imports from China to Brazil. So based on diagrams like this, we see how asymmetrical the relationship is. But it is hard to tell by how much. How can we compare this with other countries? And this is what my proposal is all about. So this is the ranking of economic complexity index. We can see Brazil was number 26 in 1995 and is now the 65th in the ranking in 2022. A clear path downwards. And China, for instance, was the 46th in 1995, and in 2022 reached position 18. A clear upwards trend. So why is this happening to Brazil? Here's my proposal. My proposal is using this economic complexity index, is building another index that I call bilateral economic complexity index. Its goal, its purpose is to measure the economic complexity of bilateral relationships. so we can compare them and map which kinds of partnerships are complexity enhancing and which ones are complexity reducing. The ones that are complexity reducing may be target for policy and diversification. So I built two possibilities. We have the anchored BECI and the endogenous BECI. I won't get into too much mathematical detail, but the anchored BECI is pretty much the mean of everything Brazil exports in terms of complexity of the product. So we measure the complexity of all products exported in the world in a given year, how complex they are, how rare they are in terms of exports. And then we measure Brazil's overall basket-weighted export basket. By doing that, we measure the complexity of Brazil basket, which is different from Brazil's ECI, because we don't use matrix here. We don't use the same mathematical category, because the ECI doesn't allow us to compare baskets. In this manner, we can compare baskets. And the second possibility is using the same technique to build the ECI, but specifically for the bilateral trade, for the exports between a country and another country. However, by doing that, we take in consideration only the exports of Brazil, not the complexity of the products from a global perspective. So each one tells us different things. Now, the anchored BECI allows us to directly compare across years and exporters. So, however, the endogenous BECI reveals structural similarity between Brazil's destinations. And here we see Brazil's aggregate basket complexity has fallen sharply between 1997 and 2024. And this capital pie we see here on the right tells us what would be the mean basket of Brazil, export basket of Brazil in terms of complexity. So it was minus 0.26 in 97, and it is now minus 1.16. And by doing this, now we can compare different baskets. We can see if a specific basket of exports between Brazil and China, Brazil and the US, Brazil and European countries are above or below this mean of exports complexity. For instance, here we see, you don't need to see in detail. I know the resolution isn't great, but we can see tendencies here. So pretty much the red one is China. The red line is China. We can see it is the lowest of the countries that are in here. We have around 10 countries here. The purple ones are European countries. The blue one is the US, and the green ones are the Mercosur countries. So what can we get from this? That complexity, the relationship, the exports to China are mainly complexity reducing in 25 to 28 years analyzed. In the case of US, it is relatively complexity enhancing. The Mercosur is the best kind of relationship Brazil has. Most of the products are way more complex than the mean products Brazil exports to most countries. And the EU is between the US and China. This is in terms of a world map. So we can see that this is in 2004. The red ones are the relationships the closest to red color are the relationships that are below. There are complexity reducing partners, and the green ones are complexity enhancing partners. The yellow ones are around the mean. Now, this is 2024. We can see how the deterioration of many partnerships, and China is one of the main concerns, but also Pakistan, Congo, Spain. Spain presents a very similar trade partnership with Brazil as China. However, Spain is not as voluminous. The exports to Spain is not as voluminous as the exports to China, as we can see here. Now, all countries you see above this horizontal line in the middle are relationships that are complexity enhancing. So these are exports Brazil makes that actually tends to benefit our productive structure in terms of complexity. It makes those are exports that are more technology intensive. Now, below this horizontal line, we have the relationships, the destinations that are complexity reducing. They are below the mean. And horizontally, the more to the right, you see a destination is the larger the share of Brazilian exports go to that country. So we see that China is way to the right compared to the other countries. Also, the size of the circle represents how diverse is our Brazilian export basket to that specific country. We see again that the Mercosur countries are the destinations that represent the most complex export baskets for Brazil. So the results show that in terms of the BCI anchored, a worsening in both cases, in both BCIs. The endogenous one represent a much greater decline. A structural isolation falls around 4 times faster, which represents a topological outlier that it is an outlier, but it cannot be ignored because it represents 30% of Brazil exports. As we can see below, and it is important to notice that the destination diversification fell from 95 in 1997 to 47 products into 2024. So even though the volume of exports is 20 times larger, the diversification of exports are half of what it was in 1997, which gives us a path towards which we can change this reality by diversification, even more the relationship with the exports to China. So those are the conclusions, the implications for the Brazil-China relationship. More than half of Brazil's secular complexity decline since 1997 is concentrated in the deepening of one bilateral relationship, the one with China. China is not only Brazil's lowest complexity partner, it is also, or at least one of the lowest, it is also a structural outlier within Brazil's bilateral export network. Mercosur and the United States provide the complexity counterweight. The regional integration tail offsets a smaller share of the loss. The bilateral BCI gives the China-Brazil literature a single replicable quantitative instrument, so we can compare the countries and the different export baskets, and we can do that quantitatively. And the policy implication is the need for diversifying Brazil-China basket. One good example we had recently is that Brazil started exporting a lot of coffee to China. Believe it or not, around 2-3 years ago, Brazil exported almost no coffee to China. So of course, it has something to do as well with a change in consuming habits in China. But there are many opportunities to be explored, even in the primary sector, for diversifying Brazilian exports to China, which might make this situation better than the current state of affairs. So, as I said, this is a work in progress. Comments, critiques, and collaboration ideas are warmly welcome. Thank you very much. 谢谢.
Okay, thanks for the speech and dear audience. And if you have any questions or ways about this topic, you can type in the chat box, and when we say it, we can transfer it to the speakers. And thank you again for Professor Lucas. And now we welcome Henrique Dussel-Peters, and his speech is titled Latin American and China Foreign Direct Investment Overview. And Henrique Dussel-Peters is also coordinator of China-Mexico Study Center at the National Autonomous University of Mexico and a professor at the National Autonomous University of Mexico. And he is also the professor at the Higher School of Economics, coordinator of the Center for Chinese-Mexican Studies at the Faculty of Economics of the National Autonomous University of Mexico, and the coordinator of the Latin American and the Caribbean Academic Network in China. So let's warmly welcome Professor Henrique Dussel-Peters.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, fantastic. Okay, thank you very much for the kind invitation to participate on these topics of Brazil and China. I live in Mexico, so I am very honored to participate in this discussion. No? I'm going to share the screen. So in the 20 minutes that I have, I would like to share with you, can you see the screen? The shared screen?
Yeah, we can.
Fantastic. Okay. So what I want to share with you are, the presentation is in Spanish. I will speak in English, and I will go pretty quickly through the several of the topics and to try to focus on the issue of Chinese investments in Latin America. Regarding references, I invite you very strongly to look at the last document of CEPAL-ECLAC, Comisión Económica para América Latina y el Caribe, that was published a year ago, with plenty of socioeconomic issues and topics, some recent publications by myself together with colleagues also at Boston University. Fundamental today, it is to integrate to the already ongoing discussions. No? When I heard now the presentation of Lucas, which is very interesting, these discussions have been going on for 25 years. In Brazil, in Latin America, in Mexico, Peru, etc. So if we want to use new indicators for trade, fundamental is to understand and to define and to be very clear what is the contribution of these new indicators compared to the already existing indicators regarding technology intensity and regarding ongoing research and results. No? Before going to the analyzing the topic of Chinese investments, I would simply highlight 5 or 6 topics that I believe are important in the ongoing discussions. No? topic number one, measured in PPP, China is already the largest economy of the world since 2016. This is fundamental for socioeconomic debates, discussions, and it is not sufficiently clear neither in Latin America nor in China in many cases. You will find a good group of analysis with Brazilian colleagues and other Latin American countries regarding the value added of Latin American countries and their exports to the United States. Here I simply present the case of Mexico. China's value added in Mexican exports to the US has been increasing drastically, and this is at the core of ongoing discussions between the US and Latin American countries. A third topic that I believe is important, we recently published a document with the University of Brasilia on this topic. China is becoming today the technological leader in Latin American imports. This is the case for Mexico, this is the case for Brazil and other countries. This completely changes the discussion today on the substitution, for example, of imports from China if you want to substitute imports from the technological leader. This is not an easy task. In many cases, it is simply impossible. A fourth topic that I want to highlight is ongoing research together with colleagues from Campinas and other universities in Brazil regarding the employment generation of China in Latin America. No? So for this long period, 1995-2021, China has generated more than 8 million jobs, and this accounts for around 15% of employment in Latin America and the Caribbean. This is very substantial. Again, 85% of this employment generation based on input-output tables, 85% through net trade, 7% through off-the or overseas foreign direct investment. I will get to the topic in a moment, and the rest through infrastructure projects. Finally, I invite you to look at the work we have been doing at this Red Académica de América Latina y el Caribe sobre China regarding strictly infrastructure projects. No? So we have since 2020 every year a monitor on Chinese infrastructure projects, 10-15 pages with the database, analyzing case studies, more than 20 case studies all over the region, including Brazil, the impact of infrastructure projects in the everyday life in Latin America, very interesting. Finally, two topics that I would like to share with you. So China is investing in Latin America, and you know what? Latin America is also investing in China. 15 Translatinas or multilatinas, including a chapter on Brazil regarding the flows, capital flows from Latin America to China, and the recent publication regarding the local impact and experiences of Latin American exports to China, including case studies of shrimps in Ecuador, oil in Rio de Janeiro, and other case studies. So welcome to a very rich analysis that is going on all over the region with colleagues from China. I want to focus on the topic of Chinese off-the again for outward foreign direct investments. No, if you are interested in the topic, you will find more than 15 years on macro, meso, micro, and territorial analysis of Chinese investment in Latin America, a recent document also regarding China's investment in Latin America, including countries with no diplomatic ties with China, such as Paraguay and Guatemala, among others, with very surprising results. In this case, again, you will find since 2017, this annual analysis of the monitor of Chinese OFDI. You can download the full data set. No? Very briefly, some results. I will simply highlight the importance of the definition of capital outflows from China. No? In the case of Brazil, you have the official data sources, which are very different than those of the Consejo Empresarial Brasil-China, which I know very well. And in the case of the work we do, we also try to distinguish between capital flows, or OFDI, and infrastructure projects. Very unfortunately, many colleagues do not make this distinction, and so we speak of pears and apples, and we have a very strange green juice where at the end we don't know exactly what we are discussing. In the case of Mexico, it would be very easy to do the same for Brazil, but again, I'm not going to talk of Brazil in front of so many Brazilians. In the case of Mexico, the methodological differences between official statistics and the method of registering the statistics based on our work are very important. For the full period 2000-2025, the differences between the official sources, data sources, Secretaría de Economía in Mexico, are fundamental. The difference is of 450%. This is Secretaría de Economía accounts for almost $6 billion accumulated investments from China and Mexico, and according to our data sources, it is a little bit above $27 billion. So statistics and methods of registration are fundamental. In what follows, I will concentrate on the results of this monitor of Chinese investments, or OFDI, in Latin America. We just published the last version several weeks ago. So for the region, Latin America and the Caribbean, Chinese investments have been the most dynamic in the 21st century if we compare it with other sources and other countries. But it is important not to overvalue the presence of Chinese OFDI in the region. For the full period 2000-2025, Chinese investments accounted for 6.14% of total incoming FDI in the region, which means, yes, it is growing very fast if you compare it with the first period in the early 21st century, but again, 94% of Latin American and Caribbean FDI is non-Chinese. It comes from the US, from Europe, from other Asian countries, etc. A second important or interesting topic is, again, the issue of employment generation. So until the end of 2025, we have almost 800,000 jobs created by Chinese OFDI in the region, accounting for more than $213 billion. And there are some other additional issues that I will leave aside. general results of the analysis, an increasing share of of Chinese in the region, or so-called greenfield investments. In the most recent period, 2020-2025, these greenfield investments account for a bit below 55% of Chinese investments in Latin America, a very rapid growth if you compare it with the earlier period, which reflects that Chinese firms are learning very quickly. In the first period, in 2005, 2009, and other in later periods, mergers and acquisitions were the main form of investment of Chinese firms. Chinese firms are learning and do not require to acquire already existing investments. There is another diversification trend regarding Chinese in the region by country. So in the early 21st century, Brazil was by far the largest recipient of Chinese investment. It accounted for more than 55% of Chinese in the first period, 2000-2004, and this share has fallen substantially. So in the more recent period, in the last 10 years, in the last 5 years, you have countries such as Peru, Mexico, Chile, among others, Argentina, of course, that are playing an important role. Diversification of China's in the region. Diversification also regarding the sectorial trends in the region. Historically, when we speak of raw materials in trade, raw materials played the most important role for China's in the region, accounting for more than 90% of Chinese for the period 2005-2009, and this has fallen to levels around 40%. It increased in the last period, 2020-2025. You have new sectors, aggregated sectors, such as manufacturing and particularly services and sectors related to the domestic market within Latin America. And the more disaggregated level, again, diversification. Metals, minerals, and mining accounted for more than 80% of Chinese in the region, and it has fallen importantly. It is still the most important sector, but you have suddenly new sectors such as auto parts, automobiles, electronics, among others. Again, I invite you to look at this monitor and at the data set that you can download for free while I am talking. No? Finally, the issue of property is important in China. The public sector is an important actor in China's in the region. There is a decreasing trend in terms of the share of public firms that are doing in Latin America, but still, for the full period, 2000-2025, almost 70% of the amount of is being pursued by Chinese public firms. And the data set allows for an incredible analysis of different types, including where is the headquarters of the Chinese firm. Again, here the share of Beijing has been falling in the last periods to around 42%, and from levels above 80% in 2010-2014. And finally, the data set allows for an analysis at the firm level. No? So in terms of employment, in terms of the amount of and other almost around 10 variables. No? So only 5 firms account for more than 35% of Chinese OFDI in the most recent period, 2020-2025. This, as we will see in the conclusions, is fundamental. Again, I invite you to use this data set to understand the methodological differences for registering FDI flows incoming and outcoming. Finally, some conclusions. I invite you to integrate to the discussions that are going on in Latin America for more than 15 years, to see differences in Brazil, in Mexico, in Argentina, to see differences by sources, concretely Consejo Empresarial Brasil-China, official sources, the results that we present, among others, no? There are some general topics, but regarding the OFDI flows that I've been trying to present and highlight, the issue of diversification is fundamental. This is Chinese OFDI in the early 21st century and in the last 10 years has changed profoundly. We cannot keep the results from the early 21st century. Interestingly, the levels of Chinese OFDI have fallen importantly if you compare it with the highest level in 2019, and they have been relatively constant at around $10 billion in the last 3 or 4 years. The share of greenfield investments has been growing importantly, and the share also of Chinese private firms in Latin America has also been increasing substantially. I believe this has enormous impact regarding policy options, no? If a Latin American country such as Brazil wishes to attract Chinese OFDI, well, you have an interesting data set of hundreds of Chinese firms that have already invested in the region, not necessarily in Brazil or in Mexico, but in Ecuador, Peru, etc., etc. You can track the results of these investments, their problems, etc., etc. And finally, yes, there has been a diversification and upgrading process of Chinese OFDI. However, and as several of the existing analysis of CEPAL, also of Red ILSA China, suggest and propose, the technological transfer through investments, Chinese investments, has been so far very poor, as poor probably as with other countries. No? So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much,
90
Professor.
minutes.
Very impressive speech. And dear audience, and if you have any question about the speech, you can write your questions in the chat box. And when we say it, we will collect it, and then we will give the question to the speakers when all the speakers finished their speech. So you are welcome to write your questions in the chat box and to communicate more with our speaker. So thank you again. Thank you very much, Professor Enrique Dussel Peters. And now let's welcome our next speaker, and Caroline Gisti Alaoui. And her speech title is Green Transition, China and Reindustrialization. What is Brazil's strategic role? And Professor Caroline is a policy and industry specialist, PhD in science and technology policy, and a master's degree in economic development from the State University of Campinas. And she is an industry specialist at the E+ Energy Transition Institute, working on topics related to industrial decarbonization, supply chains, and green industry policy. Okay, so let's warmly welcome Professor Caroline Gisti Alaoui.
Good evening, everyone. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we
Well,
can.
yeah, okay. Let me share my screen. Please, can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. So again, good evening, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity of being here with you today. For me to discuss this agenda is a very exciting opportunity. So I'm really happy to be here. I would like to present some ideas and results of some works, not just mine, but collecting from the literature that's discussing industrialization or reindustrialization, the role of green transition, and how China and Brazil could find a way to cooperate among this subject. Let's start this discussion reflecting about the industrial policy and how we have recovered in the last year, in the last 2 years, the power of this agenda around the world. So for those countries that has adopted the Washington Consensus, the financial crisis in 2018, and also more recently, the health crisis that we have with COVID-19 and the geopolitical instability that we have been watching right now and starting with Ukraine war. So this scenario has been teaching us about the importance of industrial policy and local capability. I'm not saying that we can produce all the things in a global value chains. That's not the question here, but the point is we understand with this crisis that part of the value chain is important and countries should know which part of this value chain is important and to keep this inside the countries. And this all is related to the industrial policy. Well, and when the countries that has been facing the results, the outcomes from the consensus on Washington and dealing with the crisis, what we have been watching with the China is that China that doesn't accept the Washington consensus is being a challenge for the United States in technological frontier. So we have a country that don't follow the receipt and they are in a more prepared way to deal with this scenario. And here just to reflect that in the recent years, and I'm sorry because it's in Portuguese, but in the recent years, what we have been seeing is a lot of countries that has been but announced at least $1.5 billion related to this agenda of industrial policy. We are talking about the United States, UK, European Union, Japan. So we are watching the return of this policy. We are talking about Inflation Reduction Act. I know it's not working anymore, or just part of this plan is working right now, but it was happening recently, and the industrial policy isn't out of the game, even in the Trump government, right? The European Union with the Green Deal Industrial Plan, in the Japan, the Green Growth Strategy, and so on. We have a list here to discuss. So let's take in perspective. We are discussing that industrial policy is back on the game, even for countries that has accept the Washington Consensus. They were, okay, let's stop thinking about that and let's discuss industrial policy and what is industrial policy, what we need to do. And it's a complex policy to be implemented. And what I would like to show some lights here in the discussion is that we have a new layer, a new complexity layer related to the climate transition and how to integrate the discussion about industrial policy, develop sectors, develop value chains, at the same time that we are discussing climate transition, energy transition, and how to make these subjects integrate and representing a new opportunity for countries. Also, we need to understand that we have a lot of challenges in making this, right? But the point is, we have a new layer to discuss industrial policy, the green industrial policy, the green development. I think the literature is trying to define proper words to this, but the point is, we have a new layer that we cannot neglect anymore, and the industrial policy has a new layer to respond, to address in the way that the things is being designed in all of these countries. And also, we need to understand that these countries, this power country like China, United States, European Union, all of them are discussing industrial policy. China has always been discussing in the 5 years plans, but the other countries, the United States, the European Union, all of them are discussing the priority of the value chains, which value chains we need to address, which part of these value chains, and we have some similarities about this aspect. And also we have the instruments. Okay, we have maybe a difference. In China, we have SOEs that's very strong. And in the European Union, we have some regulatory framework like CBAN, and also some instruments related to the SMEs. But the point is, all of them are discussing the value chains that's not so different among them, and they have instrument that's also not so. We are not seeing a huge difference in this table. But what we need to understand is that each country has its own development model, and because they have its own development model, industrial policy is responding in a different way. For China, we are discussing about upgrading. Even in the green value chain, they are discussing about leadership in this value chain. For the United States, it's about leadership and maybe more related to the AI, the semiconductor. And for the European Union, this is about competitiveness that has been decreasing along the years for the industrial sector, and also how to keep employees. So I'm saying that industrial policy is back. We have a new complex layer related to the green development, and countries that has implementing industrial policy, they have similarities, but they have different purpose for the use of this industrial policy. And we need to think about that when we are discussing about the energy transition value chain, because how we can integrate this discussion of energy transition in this appropriation of industrial policy for each countries. This combination brings opportunities and also challenges. The point is, energy transition is reshaping the geography of the industry around the world and creating opportunities, a window of opportunities for the participation in value chains. For Brazil, it's really nice because we have strategic assets. I'm going to discuss in a few slides parts of these assets that we have that can represent for us a way to bargain better place in this value chain. And this is important to have these assets because for Brazil, we are discussing industrial policy, green industrial transformation, and how to integrate these things and not to be more dependent of technological, abroad the foreign technology. We are discussing how to use this partnership in a more strategic way. So also we need to have in mind that competitiveness requires productive capability. It's not something that we just can turn on or turn off. We need to invest along the years and many years to develop this. So I'm saying that green technologies is the outcome. It's not the start point for discuss this green industrialization process. And here we also have some advantage in terms of Brazil, because even with the loss of participation of our industry in our GDP along the years, the last 10 or 20 years, we preserve a very diversified basic industry like the metals, the chemicals, the electronics, the machinery. So they are weak now than they were before, but we still have them, and they can be used in order to make us upgrade to take this opportunity in this green transition. To end this combination of industrial policy and green transition, my point here is that in terms of industrial policy, maybe we have been neglecting the role that international cooperation can play in our ecosystem to accelerate technology absorption and help us to develop the capacity building that we need. Thinking about this comparison about China and Brazil and the opportunity that we could have in this cooperation agenda, we need to have in mind that China has been doing, and I'm not going to explain China for the audience that's more qualified than me, but the point is China has been doing like your homework with the 5-year plans to addressing the more complex sector, complex value chains, investing in R&D, and making this revolution to put you in the innovation frontier in order to challenge the traditional countries that has been leading this for many years. And we are talking about digitalization, AI, biotechnology, quantum technology, and so on. But and also what I think it's the most important thing here that we could understand as Brazilian in order to to promote this cooperation is that China has been facing challenges with this decarbonization agenda, this green development agenda, as any country in the world, because it represents a cost for all the sector that already exists, like steel, like chemical, cement. It's a cost, we know that, but we also have a new sector that could be deployed related to this agenda of the green, and China has been doing this pretty well. And we can see here is from the Johns Hopkins University that in 10 energy transition technology that you can see here, solar, wind, nuclear, China has been leading in 7 of 10 technology. So China understands how to take advantage for this green development, green agenda, green industrialization. And let you think about the Brazilian situation in order to have conclusions of cooperation. Brazil has been, for 3 years now, has been arranging our policy and rebuilding all the ecosystem of policy related to the industrial, climate, energy. So we have a new industrial policy that calls NIBI. We have a new plan in our economy ministry that one of the things is addressing about our carbon market regulation. We also have the regulations for the biofuels, biofuels, the future of fuels, also the hydrogen, and so on. And for all of these policies, I would like to highlight the Nova Indústria Brasil, our industrial policy, because the orientation of this policy is a mission-oriented policy related to the concept of mission from the Professor Mariana Mazzucato. And one of these missions is related to the decarbonization of the economy. So we have industrial policy here in Brazil that is integrating decarbonization of the economy to deployment of new sector like wind, solar, hydrogen, and so on, with industrialization process. For sure, we need to pick the right place because we cannot compete in all the parts of these chains. But the point is, we have a new arrangement of policy and even an industrial policy that's calling for the heart of this, the decarbonization agenda. So we have space to discuss this green development, green industrialization. But thinking about all of this, we need to be awareness of the structural risk that we are facing. natural resource and clean energy don't automatically translate into value capture in these global value chains. Three things that I would like to highlight about this. The window of opportunity can be lost if we, Brazilian, don't provide the proper coordination of all these policies that I mentioned before. Also, we need to understand that we don't have the fiscal capability budget that I presented in the beginning, like $2 billion to deploy some sectors or some industry or some, we don't have that. So we need to use the coordination of the policy, coordination of the instrument, and you need to pay attention on that. Also, we need to understand that the industry transformation is something that's slow and market regulation is something that's fast. If we lost the time of these two things, maybe we are going to make some regulation that will push us to import things. And to end, something that we need to have in mind is that cooperation is a tool, and I'm defending that over here. I think we need to use this as an instrument of the industrial policy, but we need to be aware that cooperation should be designed in order to improve our local capability to provide technology transfer and avoid a technological dependence. So we are just saying this just to recover industrial policy, a new layer related to the green transition, opportunities and challenges that China can offer for Brazil, and how China has been leading this green technological revolution, how Brazil has been performing in the recent years, what's the risk that we have, and now let's talk about a little more about the opportunity. What's the assets that we have in order to negotiate, to bargain? In the 10 sector, that's the more energy intensive sector. What we can see here in the dark blue is the renewable of the consumption of the energy consumption from this sector. So my point is, we have a renewable energy metrics that for this discussion about the green industry is pretty important. We could be attracting investment here regarding these metrics to produce here. It's not easy. It's not, in the macroeconomics, it's perfect, but in the microeconomics and considering the other problems that we have in Brazil, it's hard to do, but it's an opportunity. Also, we have natural resources related to the critical minerals, other things that we cannot just explore, extract, we need to process. Otherwise, we are going to help other countries to have this green tech. Also, another opportunity that we have here is related to the recovery of the agenda that I mentioned before. Right now, we are discussing about the regulation of our carbon market and our RMV. So we are doing our homework in this regarding. And as I said before, we still have a diversified industrial capability. It's not so strong that we had before, but we still have this. And this is a base in order to improve, to upgrade. So what we should do first, in my point of view, coordination of the policy across ministry and ministry, federal and local level, subnational level. Coordination is one of the things that's more difficult to do. It's really hard to have a proper coordination of the policy, but we need to do that. And also we need to coordinate our policy instruments. I'm not going to read, but we have the domestic instrument. We have law, strategy, regulations for each one of these instruments. We need to coordinate them. We need to pick the parts of value chain that we believe we can compete and use this in a coordinated way. And also the same for the international instrument. Attract foreign investment in order to develop part of this chain is something really important. Provide international regulatory harmonization, it's really hard to do, but we can do. Imagine if we can do a carbon market regulation for carbon market, regulation for sustainable public procurement that's kind of similar, that has a conversation among Brazil and China and BRICS. It's thing that we need to discuss inside the industrial policy, and also the offtake agreements in order to help this green revolution happen. And regarding the international instruments, I was paying attention on the professor, and I'm not so sure if this is the best classification to understand international foreign investment, but this is the one that I know when I was preparing this. And what I understand for this document is that China, in terms of trade, we have been selling China commodity products, and everyone knows that. We have reprimatization of our exports when we study just the trade part of the China relationship. But when we study about the foreign investment that China has been bringing to Brazil, we understand that we have a huge potential to strengthen this relationship, because China is interested in our energy metrics, in our electricity sector, and in our industry transformation sector. So this investment is already happening. What we need to do is how to coordinate, how to integrate them in order to develop this domestic productive and technological capability regarding this green transformation. So what I'm just trying to explore is that the green industrialization can represent a window of opportunity for countries and for the relationship among Brazil and China. I think we have a lot of potentials, because Brazil has this market, this huge market that can attract China. Brazil can be this open door for the South, the global South market. Brazil, this is something that is like a message that we have. And also we need things. We need to deploy our technology ability. We need to develop technology capability in a lot of sectors. We need to have more green finance. We know that we struggle with this investment capital here in Brazil. We also need to generate more employment in a lot of parts of the country, and also to promote the regional development. We need to change the map of Brazil, and the green industry, I believe, is a great opportunity, because the parts of the Brazil that has the potential is not so southeast concentrated, and China has already realized that. That's why we have been seeing a lot of investment from China in the northwest of our country. So we have opportunities and challenges that for China is opportunities and challenge. China could use us to trade their technological 7 of 10 clean tech that you have already developed, and you may commercialize this with us. Also, it's a really interesting, I believe it's a really interesting thing to think about the joint ventures that we have been already watching here in the battery sector, and also the installation of EV in Camaçari, Bahia. So I think we have the opportunity here to understand this agenda as to take advantage. Brazil needs to understand what can do to improve the relationship, the technology and productive relationship with China. The window of opportunity is open, and that's the time to negotiate these things. And it can be, this negotiation can be a win-win partnership, a win-win relationship. And just to finish it, it's just a recovery that what I have been saying about both countries. I just would like to focus on the final message, that the central question is not if Brazil or China will cooperate. The cooperation is already taking place. The foreign investments from China to Brazil is already happening. The trade is already happening. What we need to ask the right question is if we as Brazilians can understand how to use this cooperation to support the construction of domestic capability in order to capture more value in this green transition and not just reinforce the patterns of specialization that we have been watching until now. That's it. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you so much, Professor Caroline. And we sincerely believe that both countries can seize the opportunity to have mutual development. Thank you so much. And then the next we'll welcome the Professor Josue Con-Vals. And his speech is titled China's Energy Security and the Green Transition. And Professor Josue Con-Vals is a PhD candidate at the University of Brasilia, researcher and academic director of China at University of Brasilia, and he's PhD candidate in international relations at the University of Brasilia and a master degree holder in geography from the Federal University of Pelotas, Brazil. He currently serves as director of academic affairs at the Group of Studies on China. So let's warmly welcome.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, and my presentation, is it showing to you?
Yeah, we can see.
It's
Okay, thank you. Well, hello everyone. Good morning to China. Good evening or good night to Brazil. First of all, I would like to thank you for the opportunity. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I would like also to present our group of studies here on UNB. It's called China. We are actually a group hosted here in University of Brasilia, but we have colleagues from all around the world. We have from the undergrad, for the masters and PhD students level also. And right now we have more than 80 members. All along the way, we had more than 30 different universities with participants on our group. And we cover several fields, mainly, of course, international relations, but also arts and so on. Our main activities is engaging on discussions about China. As long as here in Brazil, we have a lot of production, but sometimes we need a better net of networking between us researchers, and we have the weekly academic meetings where some researchers, professors came with lectures for us. We have also a paper called Terracotta, in homage to terracotta warriors. And we also engage in activities with universities of China, and we also make this bridge with the institutions of Brazil and the institutions of China. And I would just like to show you the great work we've been doing here, so you can follow us on the internet and see more of our academic publications and so on. We have also workshops and courses on our YouTube, and sometimes we also live stream our meetings. So now I'm going to my presentation. I am doing something kind of different from what I am used to do, because I'm not giving an analytical perspective of my research. I would like to bring a topic and put some insights, but I think that it's the main point of a conference that a opportunity of reaching to an audience such as the Chinese people it's so great. And so I would like to take a different path that we normally take on such academic events. My theme here is China's energy security and green transition. So you see how it dialogues with the other teams of our colleagues. And first of all, I would like to give a brief notion about the energy security. We can look at this historically, how the classical geopolitics played a very important role in the definition what is energy geopolitics, how the use of resources, the territories would used to be central to this kind of geopolitics, and mostly from the Western perspective, keeping the flux, the extraction, and the use of energy was the main point. And we've seen this in around the 70s with the oil shock, how this classical notion from energy geopolitics reemerged, and that was a very important energy security paradigm. Another moment of transformation in this notion was when the renewable entered in the table. So some authors started to think how would be a world where the renewable transition was completed, and speculating that with the total transition from the fossil fuels, some of the conflicts around resources would be less probable, and that's an optimistic view from the geopolitics. So we would want to move on and think not coming back on the classical notion, but not give total attention to this optimistic view. And that's where we are right now, thinking in a moment of transition. So how can we look for securing our energy in our countries, in our economies, in the moment we are right now, where the fossil fuel still plays a major role, and the constraints from choke points or disruptions is still important, but we also have to think about the risks and opportunities from transitioning the whole model of the system. So one thing that I would like to talk briefly is how transitioning from fossil fuels to renewables would be a dramatic change, because we have a model right now that is mainly focused on a stock source, per se, the gas or oil, even the coal. They are transported as they are stocked. First of all, they are extracted, of course, but then they are transported and they are consumed. And it's very consumed, they are dispersed. So you use it in a linear notion. And if we compare this to solar or wind energy, we would think about a flow source, because you have to install a whole grid that will help us to surpass this energy from the environment, but also storage it in the moments that they are on peak demand. And the use itself doesn't mean it is dispersed, because it has a long time of utilization of the resources managed to create this flow. And that's the main point, because the kind of source is so cheap right now. So, and just to say that it looks more like a circular way of producing energy. Well, as I was mentioning, in the last decade or more, we have seen a dramatic fall of the prices of renewables. You can see on solar and wind, they are the principal cases here. And that's very important if you look at the tendencies in the long time. And most of it is because of the China effort to create new technology and to create scale also. As you can see here, in the last year, was the wind and solar were very important, but what we're seeing from the year of 2026 is that probably the solar is surpassing the coal in the installed power generation, and combining solar and wind probably maybe the most of the China installed power generation capacity. So you can see there's a trend here. Well, and how can we locate this in history? I'm bringing here a notion more or less about the long duration of history, and how the in my research I work with the cycles of capitalism. But just focusing on GDP, we can see that the moment West Europe had the breakthrough with the coal energy and the steam engine, was very important to establish its imperiums, and also with USA and control oil technology. It was very important to establish its hegemony. So what we may think about the next decades or so is to think about a new breakthrough on energy and a new establishment of power dynamics in the international system. If we have if you pay more attention to this data, we can see that China is already the first one. Sorry, but we don't need to take a theologically view of the history and think that another cycle of capitalism is bring another hegemony, or as President Xi has mentioned, that we don't need to fall in the Thucydides trap in the international policy. What Ollerstein by itself says is that a new system would be possible to be constructed in some of the transitions for another cycle. And that's where I wanted to reflect with you, thinking about the very nature of this new model of energy, and how can we as a countries, as economies, and as a civilization can transit in this moment of transition. What are the risks, the opportunities, and how can the very dynamic of this new energy also transform the geopolitics? How can it be, how can it add to the forces that are making our world more multipolar, and also how can the renewables address to some crises we're facing, economic crisis, but also the climate change, and how would we see this as a great opportunity to phase away not only from fossil fuels, but from this notion of dispute and focusing on choke points and control of resources, and thinking more about connections and the grids we can integrate ourselves. And so I don't have much of time right now, but one of the notions I would like to bring to my audience, who I'm sure is pretty familiar, is thinking about the relational theory and how we as actors on this system could become more intimate, or we could create expressive ties. So how can we here in Brazil become closer to our colleagues there in China? So that was it. Thank you very much for your attention. Here are my contacts, so you can reach me anytime. And also, I would like to ask you to follow G-China and look for more information. Good night, good evening.
Thank you so much, Professor Zhu. And also, if you have any questions about the speech delivered by the speakers, you are welcome to type in the chat box. And after the last speech, we will let you have the Q&A and Q&A part. Okay. And now let's welcome our last speaker, Professor Moise Balestro, and his speech is titled "Rare Earth and Critical Minerals: An Opportunity to Strengthen Cooperation with China for Brazil's Technological Autonomy." And Professor Moise Balestro is now professor at the University of Brazilian and the director of the research group on comparative studies in economic sociology, and Doctor of Social Sciences from the University of Brazilian and a master's degree in administration from the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul. His academic career includes a period as a visiting scholar at Gulf University, Frankfurt, Germany, and as a visiting scholar at the Institute of Public Policy of the South China University of Technology, Guangzhou, China.
I'm in a meeting. Later. Okay.
Okay, so now let's warmly welcome Professor Moise Balestro.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. Let me share the screen.
Yeah, we can see you very clearly.
Okay. And I assume you can see the screen right now.
Yeah, we can see the
Okay.
screen now.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's great. Well, thank you for the invitation. Actually, there are two caveats that I like to mention. First is that I am not a Chinese researcher, although I have been in China here for 3 months in Guangzhou for a short sabbatical. And I did some research on green manufacturing in Guangzhou, in the Greater Bay Area, which includes Macau and Hong Kong. And the second caveat is that I'm now starting a research project on rare earths and critical minerals. Before, my project was on green hydrogen and electric buses. So this is something very differently from other colleagues which presented here, like at least some results of research. This is much more to open up or to trigger debate on the issue of rare earths and critical minerals. Well, the question that I posed here, which is much related to the 15th five-year plan in China, in which one of the objectives is to go global. That means to the internationalization of Chinese firms. Some of them are already very internationalized, but there is still a long way to go for many of the other companies. Okay, so the question is, there is an act which was approved very recently in the Brazilian National Congress related to rare earths and critical minerals in general, which says they establish clearly that we cannot export rare earths and critical minerals without transformation within the country, without adding value in Brazil. So this is a very important step in the sense that it avoids what happened with other minerals, and it's also very much in line with what was mentioned here about reindustrialization. And the question is, okay, but what about China? The cooperation with China, is there room for the Brazilian, can China help Brazilian technological autonomy? So this is the main point of my presentation. It doesn't mean I have an answer for that, but anyway, it's important for discussing. The first thing is, what is the strategic problem? It's if you look at the rare earths and critical minerals supply chain or chain, the value-adding process is essentially not in the ore extraction, but it's downward. It's downstream. So it's in the separation, metallization, and the permanent magnets. So if there is simply raw material exports like we have with other minerals, the highest margin would be offshore. So the downstream steps are, it's also where not only the profit is concentrated, the skilled jobs and the strategic controls. So the issue when we can't sell the raw material, we can sell the raw rare earths and critical minerals. That's pretty fine. We have to add value inside the country, but the main issue is technology. So controlling minerals without technologies like a leverage without torque, because it can be politically very sensitive, or even like flagging this issue, pledging for more national control, but without technology, it doesn't work. And then, of course, we have why would China possibly have an interest in adding value to rare earths and critical minerals in Brazil? The first point is it's the second largest rare earth reserves globally. So it accounts for 23% of global rare earth reserves. The country has in the past, and if you trace back to the past, not only Brazil, but also Mexico and Argentina, as we know from history, these countries were more industrialized than any East Asian countries in the 1940s and 50s, with the exception of Japan. So, and back there, Brazil has demonstrated the capabilities, the capability to build, to master the complex chemistry industry for the standards from 1940s and 50s. At the moment, we don't have the commercial scale separation. Refining is also missing, and the downstream magnet manufacturing is still insufficient. Even though it's not very, if you compare, about $2 billion is nothing in terms of investment. So it means it is possible to rebuild to this supply chain with downstream steps which add more value for the exports of transformed products. Then we have, it comes from, there is a national policy, but there is, this is not 2024, this is more recent. It was approved in, this one is about national policy, which is broader, but the act concerning rare earths and critical minerals is probably from, I think it's from the beginning of May or something like that, very recently. And so there is this mandatory process to add a legal demand to add value. But as many other things, it risks being a strategy on paper. So even the opposition candidate in Brazil, who is famous for being a Trumpist, and who's famous for having a very anti-national talk, he mentioned that, oh, okay, we have to add value to our critical minerals, we have to reindustrialize Brazil and all that. Okay, this is much easily said, but much more difficult to do it. And why does the mandate can fail? First, there is no, the manufacturing base for magnet, for alloying, for solvent extraction, and we have no domestic buyers if downstream demand is absent. So there are serious problems concerning the organization of this value chain for rare earths and critical minerals. Well, what about China in this relationship? One important thing about the latest 5-year plan in China is when it clearly sets the ambition of internationalization strategy. So it is upgrading firms from product export to internationalization. That means setting up subsidiaries in different countries and doing this at a much larger scale. And they, according to the plan, it's jointly building capabilities and ecosystems so the Chinese enterprises, they with policy support, as we know, although this policy support is still being built also in China, so it's not something which is already well established here. But anyway, building these capabilities, these innovation capabilities, it also requires this global perspective, and then there are many issues to be addressed. First one, we know that the Chinese milieu, to avoid this this buzzword ecosystem, let's use the word milieu. The Chinese milieu is very well developed, and it's very hard to transfer this. It's extremely competitive. By all means, technologically, cost competitive and all. So the Chinese firms which go abroad, they are not willing to lose comparative advantage or competitive advantage from in relation to other global competitors by losing the connections, by losing their supply chain in China. So does it mean they can't develop a supply chain in Brazil? Yes, they can, but there are many issues to be addressed. There is another crucial point, which is which concerns the internationalization, is that this is like from my talks with Chinese colleagues here, the Chinese fear that other countries can do what they did in relation to European subsidiaries, European and North American subsidiaries. So the German companies which invested in China, okay, there wasn't an automatic technology transfer, but the Chinese they learned it very quickly, and they developed very quickly the capabilities to produce. So they started as suppliers, which is low-end suppliers, or and they went on adding value in such a way that they were able to build their own brands and compete with those firms that they were previously the suppliers of these firms. So they're afraid this can also take place in other countries. Another point is the geopolitical issues. So you see that there is a lot of control by the Chinese government, and there is a lot of control related to the extraction operations, the refining and the separation, because China has more than 90% in the case of in the case of rare earth. So this is let me just to wrap it up this point. So you have to consider the experience, the learning process of Chinese firms going abroad. You have to consider the great advantage of the Chinese milieu in relation to and their supplies and their supply chain in China in relation to other countries, and how they can develop local supplies, considering in such a way that they will be very as competitive as the Chinese suppliers. And one third point is the issue of control. So how can they address the development of Brazilian suppliers, Brazilian supply chain, without losing the control of key technologies? So, and you have in theory, Brazil has the leverage to foreign access. I mean, foreign access is increasingly framed around domestic technology development and job creation. Brazil has the leverage because it has the natural resources. The country is not automatically aligned with the US, has a strategic non-alignment with a preference for China. Although we know that it depends on the political mood, because if the extreme right comes back to Brazil, to the government, this situation can change. But anyway, the country has a strategic non-alignment and the resource potential. So there are three elements to support a bargain with China, in the sense, okay, we are more than welcome Chinese investment in rare earths and critical minerals, but we don't want this to be solely the raw material exports, but helping to develop technology and to build the supply chain in the country. Well, these are the main roadblocks that make the execution difficult, beyond those I already mentioned. So you have the Chinese export controls, you have the missing middle. Brazil doesn't have the middle between the natural resources and the final products. And there is this, in mining, this is for Brazil, sure, Enrique Dussel has much more information on that than me, but the Chinese firms, they, in the case of mining, in the case of rare earths, they have favored, or in Brazil at least, they have favored acquisitions over greenfield downstream ecosystems. So license and infrastructure gaps reduce the interest for deeper localization. This is something I have gathered from different news, different articles. As I said, this is just to begin, but of course this is a claim which has to be empirically tested. Then you have the investment evidence concerning the extraction, and so the Chinese mine investment in Brazil was 556 million. That's 13% of Chinese investment in Brazil, and it was mainly on acquisitions. Well, the final slide. What is the key takeaway for, as I said, something which is, I haven't started this research yet. I have submitted a project, so we will start this research as soon as I get the positive answer for my submission. But the key takeaway is there is an opportunity. Some other colleagues mentioned this. Brazil has reserves. There is a policy opening, a bargaining position, which is very important. But there is also a constraint that the country needs the technology transfer, so needs domestic buyers, the industrial execution, and there is also this risk of being a formal processing without real autonomy. I mean, without technological autonomy. So the decisive question is not whether Brazil can restrict raw exports. This is easy to do in a certain way, but it's whether it can build the downstream system that makes restriction economically useful. Otherwise, it's not going to bring any real benefit for the reindustrialization of the country. Well, so this is my presentation. I hope I was within the time frame of the presentation. And well, here also the Chinese xie and this concept of ancient Chinese philosophy Tianxian, which is Tianxian, which is a part of the current discussion. I mean, which is a cultural heritage, which is part of the Chinese conception of foreign relations, and this idea of a common prosperity. All of us living under the same heaven. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Moise. And now we will come to our Q&A part. And then in the chat box, we have the questions, and we will go through it by the time order. So the first question is posed to Professor Dussel Peters, whose OFDI monitor I follow since 2023, and of which I am great admirer. It's interesting to observe that even though in trade the relationship pattern with Latin America seems very concentrated, and the cause for concern in the matter of dependency okay, and in dependency from Mexico maybe, and yeah. Okay, Mexico may be an exception on this matter. In terms of Chinese FDI in the region, we see the opposite. We can identify a clear tendency toward diversification, including long-tradables like infrastructure and energy and the technology-intensive sector. So, Professor Henrique Dussel Peters, do you see any connection between these apparently opposing traits? Yeah, this question is from Lucas, Professor Lucas.
Yes. Thank you very much, Lucas. Again, hearing and listening to several of the presentations, I would very strongly encourage you to integrate to already ongoing debates and discussions. Again, the work of CEPAL, ECLAC, of REDA LSE China regarding raw materials, technology, trade, investments, rare earths, etc., has been discussed pretty much in detail regarding global value chains, segments of global value chains, technologies, firms, etc. We don't have to start from zero. And regarding specifically the question of Lucas, initially, there is apparently a contradiction between what you highlight in your presentation, Lucas, and what we see in the analysis in the last 20 years regarding trade concentration. In a group of items, we work more with the harmonized tariff system, etc. However, if we begin highlighting that China is becoming today a technological leader. No, look at the work again that I highlighted in the references at the beginning. Particularly interesting is the work of ASPI, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, that has been analyzing 64 high-tech global value chains, and in which in the last period, 2020-2024, Chinese firms are becoming the technological leaders in 57 of 64 global value chains. This is absolutely impressive. 20 years ago, the leadership of Chinese firms was in 3 out of 64 global value chains. No? So what we're witnessing in Brazil, in Argentina, in Mexico is again a group of firms from China that are upgrading from a technological perspective dramatically. So Lucas, there, when we speak of trade, we probably have to disaggregate exports and imports. And the recent work we have been doing, published by the University of Brasilia, including an analysis for Brazil's trade and particularly imports, no? They are highly connected. No? So the basis is China's technological upgrading in trade, Latin American imports. I remember the case of Mexico, but there is also the data. I can send you the analysis for Brazil. 30% of Mexican imports from China are capital goods, no? The share of the United States that Mexico imports from the United States is close to 12%, no? So again, China is becoming a technological leader in Latin American imports, and this is associated with this upgrading process also regarding of China's investment in Latin America, not only diversification, but technological upgrading all over the region. And this, just to finalize, this is most important for the discussion in Latin America that is going on as a pressure from the United States in order to substitute for imports from China. If China is becoming the technological leader in Brazil, in Argentina, in Mexico, in their respective imports, import substitution will be extremely difficult. So we are not only speaking of underwear and socks and footwear, but we are speaking of auto parts, automobiles, telecommunications, etc., in which China has the technological leadership. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Professor. And here is also a question for Lucas Panejo from Professor Henrique. And in your opinion, what is the contribution of the complexity index and the discussion in light of 25 plus years of discussion and far before China on trade technology associations, analysis for GVC and its segments, debate beyond raw materials and the discussion since the 1990s by George Cards and others. Are these discussions somehow connected? So please, Professor Lucas Panejo.
Thank you very much. I also read the question from, well, I can answer Professor Moises' question later, but it pretty much only adds up to Professor Dussel Peter's previous question. So I did start reading what we could already call some of the classics of Cepalian literature, structuralist literature, since Raul Prebisch and Furtado, and so many others I could mention in terms of premature industrialization, Castillo and Martins Neto, who published at CEPAL, but also this Gupta and Singh, even Danny Roderick, who came up with the expression, who is not a structuralist, but also Rawthorne and Ramaswamy, Fiona Tregina, Antonio Andreoni. So they all talk, also Feijó and Loureiro here in Brazil, Professor Brescia Pereira. They all have different considerations of the deterioration of Latin American exports, or their primarization, or even deindustrialization by primarization in Latin America, and particularly in the case of Brazil. But what the reason I advanced on the economic complexity literature is because MEVA GDP or MEVA GDP share, which is the main indicator to measure the industrialization in the region, has an important shortcoming because it doesn't detail enough what is really going on. You see that most economies, I mean, not only the developed economies, but the developing economies, such as China, even China, Brazil, and so many others, go through a expected process of tertiarization or servicialization. So services increase in their share in GDP in comparison to manufacturing. So it is expected that MVA over GDP to decrease anyway. So how much of it is expected and how much of it is not expected? Of course, these authors also deal with it. But economic complexities seem to me as a novelty in the field, a better way or a way to measure it that it was worth investing in. So even though ECI presents theoretical and empirical shortcomings, it has been proving a better predictor recently in the literature for economic growth in the next years than MVA GDP share ratio, offering an updated methodology for measuring structural change. So MVA GDP ratio captures the size of manufacturing most of the time, but economic complexity captures its sophistication and the diversity of productive capabilities revealed by export patterns. A country can have, for instance, high MVA GDP ratio exporting low complexity manufacturers, while another has moderate MVA GDP ratio exporting high complexity products such as sophisticated services. So ECI distinguishes these cases and MVA doesn't. For the Brazil-China question specifically, ECI, in my opinion, seemed to be a better lens because what matters is not just whether Brazil deindustrializes in volume terms, but whether the productive capabilities mobilized in its exports became narrower and less sophisticated. In the end of the day, I think my enterprise is to build upon what's already there, is to provide a new perspective, because a lot has been written about this using MVA GDP ratio metrics. So it's to complement it, not to replace it. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, professors. And then there will be our last question for this moment. And this is a question from Professor Henrique Dussel, and it is for Professor Caroline Geest. And it is a fashionable discussion that industrial policy is back, useful and comparable for China. In China, forms of its public sectors account for at least 40% of China's GDP, i.e., China's growth, development, and technological development goes far beyond industry policy, a more Western debate, and invites to an understanding of its property structure. What is your opinion on this discussion, i.e., is a discussion on industry policy in Brazil comparable with China? So please, Professor Caroline Geest.
Well, thank you, Professor, for the question. I answered in the chat, but I'm just saying here the same thing that I wrote there. I agree with you that we are dealing with this comparison has limits, and we need to understand these limits because the China development models, I think we can understand that the industrial policies institutionalized in the China development. It's completely different for our perspective in Brazil, that we have this like go up industrial policy, go down industrial policy, and when we go down industrial policy, our state just lose the capability of do industrial policy, and they don't know how to select the value chain, how to select the instruments, and they need to learn how to do over and over again. And the bureaucracy, you see, we stay at 10 years without industrial policy here. And to elaborate NIBI, we need to learn how to do this again and again. And it's completely different from China that has been doing this along the years. In each 5 years plan, you have this foresighting about technology and about the sectors, and they are planning this. It's a planned development model. It's completely different. But just to justify what I was trying to do, I think the comparison is important for us, at least in terms of understanding the instrument that they are using. Okay, SOEs, the SOEs that we have, if we can call these as SOEs, it's not comparable. But another one, the credits, the subsides, the R&D, and so on. We need to understand the instruments and also the value chains that is the target for China and for other countries in order to understand the position that we could and we should assume in the design of our own industrial policy. That's, I think, is some area that the comparison is welcome. And in terms of the institutionalization of that, I agree with you that we shouldn't compare, because it's a different development model, and the industrial policy has different role in this development model regarding Brazil and China. But thank you for the question.
Okay, thank you, professors. And in the chat box, we can see there are still questions waiting. But now, since we can find that our Professor Henrique Dussel-Peters is our favorite in the Q&A part, so please allow me to, on behalf of our audience, to invite Professor Henrique Dussel-Peters to have some remarks about our seminar and our meeting today. Thank you, Professor Henrique Dussel-Peters.
I didn't understand. You asked me to give some additional responses, or?
We want you to have some remarks about today's seminar, and because now it's just you and other speakers about saying wonderful speeches, and now of course we are coming to an end, and you are also the favorite in our Q&A part. So we, on behalf of the audience, of course we want to say, as saying from there, we expect more from you. So we want you to give some remarks about today's meeting, about the speech, and also the future perspectives that you might have about our two countries' cooperation. Thank you.
No, I would simply invite the audience, several of the colleagues, Professor Balestro also, and Lucas and several others, simply to integrate explicitly to the ongoing debates, discussions, etc. No, in many cases we have to, from research being done by Chinese colleagues, no, so there is an increasing group of Chinese researchers working on these topics, and also in Latin America, also in Brazil. And so to integrate, in many cases, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. No, the wheel already exists. We can be very critical to the existing contributions, and this allows for a learning process. No, otherwise we do not learn too much, and we do not allow for a quality of the institutions. No, and so the integration to already existing research is fundamental. No, but welcome. I think it has been a great afternoon, night, morning, and I believe we have all learned a lot. No, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Professor. And now we still have a question, and this question is from Isabel, and this question is to Professor Lucas. Considering the relationship between economic complexity and the technology competitiveness presented in your framework, to what extent can technological cooperation truly exist independently from geopolitical competition? So please, Professor Lucas, thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. And again, I'd like to thank the other questions and the comments from both Professor Lucel Peters and Professor Moisés. Answering specifically, Isabel, very good question. I think, well, in many ways, we can see further technological cooperation, even in the presence of geopolitical competition. In the case of Brazil and China, there isn't a geopolitical competition as tensionated as we see in other cases. Actually, China is way ahead of us in many sectors. And one way we can actually advance in terms of complexity and get something from China, some cooperation from China in their favor as well, is advancing in the global value chains to next steps, because we are so way behind in terms of what we mostly export: crude oil, iron ore, and soybeans, that we may add a little more value to these goods and export them to China, without menacing what China is really focused on now, which is, instead of being the world's largest factory, is being now the world's main technological powerhouse. So they are way ahead of us. They are adding much more value in the state of science and state of art technological production, and we may still be their important suppliers, adding more value to what we already export and exporting even more goods than we already do, without necessarily menacing their development model. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor. And then there we have another question from Isabel to Professor Moisés. And considering your argument that policy alone cannot guarantee industrial execution, what do you believe is the most critical factor for developing countries to achieve true industrial sovereignty in strategic sectors? So please, Professor Moisés, illustrate. Thank you.
Okay. Well, if you think about Brazil, the answer is a bit more complicated, because my argument is that this is in general. Brazil has a serious structural constraint on industrial policies, and it has to do with our incentive structure. So the country has one of the highest interest rates in the world. The country has an extreme volatile exchange rate. So the incentives are not for manufacturing investment. This is one important macro issue, which has an enormous influence. And but the second point is it's as we say, it's a tango. We have to dance with China, and this tango implies that also we'd have to check if how in what conditions. Exactly what is the strategy, what kind of support can we offer for Chinese firms internationalizing in Brazil, and what sort of local suppliers we can really develop. So this issue has much to do with the business perspective. So it's not only policy, but it's also business perspective from Chinese companies and eventually some Brazilian companies which do not exist so far, but maybe can be created or existing companies which would diversify into other types of supply chain. But I think in general it tends to be, well, then there are issues which are within the policy realm, like regulatory issues. For example, one Chinese company I interviewed in Guangzhou, GAC, they manufacture electric vehicles, and they questioned me, what about tax system, which is very complicated. So this question, I said, there has been a tax reform, but you know, if I don't know exactly how this is effectively working. Certainly it is improved, but this kind of question is within the realm of a policy. And so that this is my point. We have to consider business, and we have to be much more, this is something we can learn from Chinese, to be much more adapting, to be much more flexible in the sense of implementing policies. And there is still very much top-down idea, and the officials in Brazil, the bureaucrats who are responsible for policy design, their interaction with the business sectors is still very faulty, I'd say. It's not so embedded autonomy, by quoting Peter Evans.
Okay, thank you, Professor. And now course time is limited, and our third panel will come to an end very soon. And now please allow me to, on behalf of the audience, and to invite our speakers today to have some closing remark for today's panel meeting and or other things. And first, Professor Lucas Pinto da Silva, would you have some closing remark about today's conference? Thank you.
Thank you very much for this. First of all, thank you very much for this invitation. It has been a pleasure to discuss such important issues, and they are very important for me in my research with professors that are so distinguished and so experienced in their fields. Thank you for the questions and the interest in my research. It has been very exciting, actually, to formulate the answers and to have this opportunity. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a good night and a good afternoon.
Okay. Thank you, Professor. And Professor Henrique Dussel-Peters, and any closing remark for us? Thank you.
Yes, congratulations again on the seminar and on the discussion. And I would simply invite some of the audience to engage in the effort with a group of colleagues to understand China conceptually from a Latin American perspective. We have been in the last 10 or 15 years trying to highlight concepts such as the public sector in China, concepts such as the globalization process with Chinese characteristics, the concept of security shoring, and the concept finally of new triangular relationships. No? So I would invite you to consider these concepts, which I believe are important in these discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor. And Professor Caroline Giusti Alue, any closing remark? Thank you.
I also would like to thank you for the opportunity of being here speaking and reflecting with so many professors, distinguished professors. The Green Industrial Agenda is something that I'm trying to reflect myself in order to develop my postdoc research. So it's a very wonderful space to be here and to hear from you in order to think together. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for all of this organization.
Thank you so much, Professor. And Professor Juozi Kon Val, and can you give us some closing remark? Thank you.
I would also like to thank you all for the opportunity. It's been a pleasure to join the efforts from China, and we look forward to keep on touch and make another event, something like that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. And Professor Moazi Belastro, can you give us some closing remark? Thank you.
Yes, I think this initiative was interesting, as we have several initiatives of cooperation or Brazil study in China. But I think it hasn't, although there are several initiatives, they're not talking about coordination. They're not well coordinated. And I fully agree with what Enrique said, that we can't reinvent the wheel. So there is a lot of things. When I found out about CEA-NEA-UFF, and I want to say I'm not researching China. This is not my topic, but I'm interested, I'm curious about that. And when I found out about CEA-NEA-UFF and all the data they have been organized and analyzed over the last 25 years, I visited it at UNAM, sorry. So I think there is, and maybe what I think is still missing is the cultural aspect. For example, I know German scholars who have been researching China for a long time, and I also met some of their PhD students as supervisors. They speak Chinese, they speak fluent Chinese, they know the culture, they know the history. So the Europeans are much more embedded in I mean, the Germans at least, much more embedded in the Chinese context than we are. And it seems that we have been trading with China over the last 20, almost 30 years systematically. And still, if you think about the number of Brazilian PhD students who speak Chinese and who are doing research in China, is still very tiny. And so we need to increase, when Enrique spoke about the conceptual issue, it has to do with the language also, it has to do with the culture. It's very difficult to understand the Chinese characteristics if you don't understand a little bit about the Chinese history, economic and political system, and all these steps, the Chinese governance. So my point is, we do need urgently to strengthen this cooperation, to expand the cultural and the language interchange.
Thank you very much, Professor. And I think that what we have done here is also the very step for us to get to know each other better. And thank you so much for your impressive speech and all your distinguished professors. And also thank you for all your warm participation of our dear audience. And thank you very much. And then now our meeting is coming to an end. But I think that our connection should not be end. We should also work together and cooperate each other to look for the future for the mutual development. And thank you very much. And we hope that in someday we can not just only meet online, and we can also meet in face-to-face and have more direct and more help and more insightful dialogues with each other. Thank you. And good night.
Congratulations.
Okay, yeah. And and then good night to our professors and the researchers and audience in Brazil, and a good noon and have lunch for the audience in China. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you.
Buen provecho. Okay.